Hello class, good afternoon, happy Wednesday. Thank you for tuning in. And in this video, I'm going to give you a little help with the carbon cycle. So when you're reading chapter 2.2 of the carbon cycle, or when you're working on the final part of the ecosystem energy and matter worksheet, you can watch this video to help you out with those parts of this week's work. Okay, and in this video, I'm going to give you a breakdown of how to read a carbon cycle. So let's show a carbon cycle. It's not the same one as your worksheet, but here's one, and a lot of stuff going on at first glance. You got arrows, you have different pictures, different objects, all these titles everywhere, little numbers. So there are three things to pay attention to. One are the arrows. Okay, so what are they? What do the arrows mean? And then the terms that are in the model can mean two different things. So in this video, we'll break down what those are, how to read them, how to understand this. Okay, so first thing we need to know, sometimes these terms can be reservoirs or sinks for carbon. Now, when you think of a sink you can fill with water. Okay, so a carbon sink is a place where you can fill up with carbon. You can store carbon. Same with a reservoir. You go to Millerton, you go to Pine Flat, you go to Shaver. Those are reservoirs. They store water for use in agriculture or electricity. So on planet Earth, a carbon reservoir is a place where carbon gets stored up. So some carbon reservoirs or sinks. First, the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide can get stored up in the atmosphere. Second, the biosphere. Whether that's on land or in the ocean, the biosphere is all living organisms on planet Earth. So I have a picture of the Amazon forest. It's a biosphere that stores a lot of carbon. So all of the mass of a tree, all the animals that are in the Amazon forest, they all contain carbon and they all store carbon. Whether it's in the carbohydrates or your skeleton or your muscles or proteins or fats, that's all a place where carbon can get stored up. Second are soils, on land or in the ocean. Okay, some rocks contain carbon. So these cliffs are composed of a rock called limestone, that one part of that rock is carbon. And so and a lot of this carbon comes from dead, fossilized microorganisms that have been slowly stacking up over time. But carbon can be stored here in the soils. Next, in soils or in the ocean, you can have fossil fuel deposits. So again, these were once living organisms that have died and from Earth's pressure have pushed it and squeezed it and turned it into coal or oil or natural gas. And as long as they're not released, they act as a store of carbon, a reservoir of carbon. Okay, oceans also act as carbon reservoirs. Now, if you think of soda, the fizzy, the bubbles, the carbonation that comes to soda, that is carbon dioxide gas that's dissolved in your soda drink. Okay, oceans do the same thing, just on a huge, massive scale. All of this ocean, as waves are happening and the atmosphere wind is blowing, carbon dioxide gas gets dissolved into the oceans, and the ocean can store lots of that carbon. All right, so now when we look at this model, if you want, pause the video, identify the reservoirs. Where are the sinks, the carbon reservoirs in this video? So pause the video, quiz yourself, and then jump back on. Okay, so hopefully you did that. Now if I look, let's look on this left half. So one reservoir is plant biomass. So that would be in our biosphere. So when plants are doing photosynthesis, they're absorbing carbon and storing it. Soil carbon, so we have a reservoir here. And then we have a reservoir, the deep oceans, the surface oceans. And then we have the atmosphere. So this model, it's not complete in its reservoirs, but you can use this model to identify some reservoirs now with what you've known, with what you've learned. So let's go next. Let's look at processes. So let's look at the remainder of the terms and the arrows. So processes are ways that carbon gets transferred from one reservoir to the next. All right, so the first one, the atmosphere to the biosphere. Photosynthesis, it keeps popping up. Okay, and a reminder, photosynthesis is from the carbons, from the matter side, it's carbon dioxide being turned into sugar, carbohydrates. So plants are sucking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it in their tissue. Okay, and this can also happen in the ocean. So algae and plants that live in oceans, whether that carbon dioxide is dissolved in the ocean or they're pulling it straight from the atmosphere, they can do photosynthesis too and turn carbon dioxide into other carbon compounds. Okay, and then the reverse happens. So if you reverse that process and you go now biosphere or ocean back to the atmosphere or back to the ocean, you would do cell respiration. Your mitochondria would kick on. And you would take that sugar, you would take that carbon compound and break it down and pull energy out of it and release carbon dioxide back out into the atmosphere or back into the ocean. Okay, and then from the biosphere, if an organism in the biosphere dies, it can go into the soil. So through death and decomposition, the carbon that was found in this fish or this rat or this, I don't know what that is, probably some mammal. The carbon got decomposed and processed back into the soil. But the reverse can also happen. So you can go soil to atmosphere or soil to ocean through cell respiration. So the bacteria, the mushrooms, the worms, the pill bugs, the decomposers, the detritivores that are chewing on that dead organism from the biosphere can release that carbon back out as respiration. Okay, so with those biological processes in mind, we can look at a simple carbon cycle centered around a tree, our biosphere, biomass. So carbon goes into a plant from the atmosphere to the biosphere through photosynthesis. Okay, and then that plant breaks down into organic carbon in the soil, and then bacteria, as they're breaking it down, are releasing carbon into the atmosphere, and we have this cycle going round and round. Now, when we go atmosphere to ocean, dissolving. Okay, I brought it up with the soda example. So when wind blows over the ocean or these waves happen, oceans can grab carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Okay, but the reverse also happens. So when wind picks up and ocean waves spray ocean mist, some carbon dioxide can evaporate back into the atmosphere. Okay, so let's pause. Let's look at a different carbon cycle. So we've seen processes, we've seen reservoirs, and so here's an ocean carbon cycle. So let's start. We have carbon dioxide up in the atmosphere up top, and then through dissolving or evaporation processes, that carbon dioxide is moving from one reservoir to the next, from the atmosphere to the ocean. Okay, and then through currents, that carbon dioxide gets moved throughout the ocean. Okay, and organisms in the ocean that can do photosynthesis, phytoplankton, algae, plants, they take that carbon dioxide in and absorb it into the biosphere. And then if those die, they can fall down and go into the sediment. They can be picked up. They can be eaten by other organisms. Respiration can happen, a process, and releases that carbon dioxide back into the ocean. Okay, and these organisms can move around the ocean, transferring carbon from one place to the next. They can die. They can fall down into the sediments in the deep ocean. So when you're reading your carbon cycle, you're following the arrows, and you're reading what processes the arrows are telling you. So carbon dioxide, okay, well, process, substance, or reservoir. Okay, so carbon dioxide is a substance. And this arrow is showing me that it can go into the atmosphere, into the ocean. Okay, it could be carbon uptake by phytoplankton. Okay, these arrows show me what can happen to that carbon, where it can go. So when you're reading that carbon cycle, pay attention to the arrows, from where to where are they going, what are the reservoirs they're in, and what are the processes. Okay, so some other stuff, from fossil fuels to the atmosphere. Humans, we can burn fossil fuels, and sometimes it happens. It can happen naturally or spontaneously. That's the more of the exception. Okay, so when we are driving cars and motorcycles, when we're flying a helicopter that's going past me right now, we're powering boats. We are using factories to generate electricity or to build products. That's all burning fossil fuel. That's taking carbon and gasoline and coal and natural gas and transferring it into the atmosphere. Okay. Also, humans, through our land use, we can take carbon that was in the biosphere or soil and put it back into the atmosphere. So if we're, clear cutting forests and using that wood to make products or to burn, we're releasing that carbon. If we do any sort of burning of forests, we're trying to clear land out. If we till soil for farming, that's all releases carbon into the atmosphere. So now we can go back and look at this first model, and let's go left to right. So photosynthesis, it's a process. It's taking carbon from the atmosphere reservoir into plant biomass, the biosphere reservoir. And we see that through plant respiration, a process, we can release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, a reservoir. Okay, or that carbon from a tree through death and decomposition can go into the soil and go into the soil carbon reservoir. And then microbes can chew that stuff up, decompose it further, and that through respiration releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere reservoir. In the back, we have a factory taking fossil fuels and burning them and releasing that carbon from one reservoir, fossil fuels, into another, the atmosphere. Okay, and let's go to the right. So here we see that air-sea gas exchange, dissolving, evaporating, so going from the atmosphere to the ocean and back and forth. Okay, we have photosynthesis and respiration again, showing carbon going from the ocean or the atmosphere into the biosphere and the other way. And then we have organisms that die in the ocean and then they fall into the sediment from ocean reservoir to soil reservoir. Okay, so now after watching this video, take a look at that model on your ecology, energy, and matter worksheet, and hopefully it should be a little better to comprehend and read. All right, bye everyone.